So today, yes, a little bit about myself. I'm a reader in computing and social responsibility at Montfort University, and I'm part of the Living Innovation project. And part of this workshop today is about looking at responsible innovation across a series of different innovation industries. And one of my particular areas of interest is in co-creation workshops, particularly with different groups of people. And for the Living Innovation project, I did a series of workshops with families from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And you can see the outputs and some of the information about that on the Living Innovation website, which we'll link to at the end. So what we will be doing today is there'll be a series of talks, and then we'll have an interactive workshop. Please, if you'd like to ask any questions, please use the chat function at any time, and then I'll be asking them in a dedicated question and answer session at the end of the three speakers. Please do mute yourself. Obviously, I can see that most people have already. Thank you very much for doing that. And if if you have a question and you would like to ask it with your camera on, you're more than welcome to. I will be offering that at that point, at the question and answer section of this session. If you do have any technical support requirements, Svetlana Ivanova is our technical support person. She's on the call, and she's also available by telephone number. Also, if that doesn't work, we have a backup person, Katrin, who is happy to take your call as well to help you with any of the technical side of things today. So yeah, please do make use of that if you do need it. So right now we are having a short introduction. Then I'll be inviting Andre Martinuzzi, who is the head of the Living Innovation Project, to introduce responsible innovation and the business case for responsible innovation. Then we'll have Carlos Cesar, who is the head of ISINNOVA, who will be talking about responsible innovation in smart public transport. Klaus-Peter Vega from Siemens, talking about responsible innovation for smart mobility. We will then follow that with a question and answer session, and then there'll be a short co-creation session using a Miro board, which I'd like you to, if you're able to participate in, I'd really appreciate that, to get some information about responsible innovation that you're doing, or that you're interested in, or what you're interested in from the public transport sector. So our speakers today, Andre Martinuzzi, as I said, he's the coordinator of the Living Innovation Project. He's also the director of the Institute for Managing Sustainability at Vienna. We have Carlos Cesar, who's the research director at ISINNOVA in Italy. And we have Klaus-Peter Vega, who is the head of Siemens Accessibility Competence Center in Germany. And we're very happy to have them speaking today about their areas of expertise. So our first speaker I would like to introduce is Andre Martinuzzi, who will be talking about responsible innovation and the business practices, the business case for responsible innovation. Thank you, Andre.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are from. Welcome to this workshop where we would like to talk about what we achieved during the last 3 years in a European project, and to see if our achievements, if our outcomes, if our approach could be useful in the public transport sector, because we dealt with smart homes and smart health. Now you might spontaneously say, what does it have to do with you? Yeah. It's normally when you're in public transport, you're not at home. So you're outside the home. However, I think smart homes, smart health, and public transport have something in common. At least they have, they have in common that digitalization has strong effects on both, that both care about user needs. So otherwise you have a subway and nobody takes it, or you have a smart home and you can't sell it. So actually it's with the people that you have to design it. And it has some technological challenges. The same technologies will hit these two areas of living. So if we talk about, let's say, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robotics, these are all things that will show up in your future home, for sure, but perhaps also in your future public transport system. So what we've done in the Living Innovation Project during the last 3 years was we worked on framing responsible innovation as a business opportunity. Now you might ask the question, why? Well, actually, before it has been seen as a societal demand. There has been a huge debate among business ethic experts, policy experts, policymakers about what technologies are socially accepted and desirable. And when you talk about that to innovation managers, they most of the time say, yeah, I know about markets, I know about technologies. But considering all these complex demands and requirements of society, that's a little bit overloading our smart and agile and target-oriented innovation process. So for many business representatives, responsible innovation was rather a burden than an opportunity. And 3.5 years ago, we formed this consortium by finding the business case, finding the business opportunities that derive out of the idea of responsible innovation. We've done so together with a number of companies you probably know, Siemens, Telefonica, Infineon, our IT companies, Ericsson as well, Atos as well, Otto Bock is a healthcare company. So major companies, and together we explored how such a business opportunity-oriented approach to responsible innovation might look like. So we came up with this kind of narrative, with this kind of explanation. What is responsible innovation in a business context? What is the business case that stands behind it? What are the societal benefits and what concepts can we make use of? Actually, it's three dimensions, it's three aspects. First of all, it's taking care about impacts. And that's not really new, although it's challenging for many companies. It's not so new because we know the term corporate social responsibility for many, many years in the business sector. And one of the definitions, and the most common definition of corporate social responsibilities, take care of your impact. Increase the positive ones, decrease the negative ones. If we translate it to an innovation context, it means to innovate while taking care of impacts and with a clear purpose. So what's the business case? Well, actually, you reduce risks and costs. Just remember Contagan case, remember asbestos. Think about the very high public spendings we need for taking care of nuclear waste. Also from a business case, remember how Google promoted its Google Glass and how high the sunken costs were when Google Glass was rejected by people. So actually, it is about considering future impacts while you innovate to avoid negative impacts. That's the societal benefit, and to reduce risks and costs. The second aspect is about innovating with the people and for the people. So this means to broaden the number of people and also the quality of people, the diversity of people that you involve into your innovation processes, not just to involve the usual suspects. Well, in many cases, when we talk about new technologies, you probably involve urban, young, male, highly educated, wealthy men. So men, yeah, nerds, techno nerds. These are the ones which are usually involved when you create new technologies, or you involve your employees in your company and perhaps their families because they have to. If you involve the non-usual, non-suspects, people that are not linked to your company, it gets a little bit more tricky, because the question then arises how to approach them, how to involve them, how to make it easier for them to participate, and also how to deal with this diversity. But the benefit is you get more and better fitting ideas. And we have had some very nice cases in the Living Innovation Project where we can show that these are really much better ideas. Third aspect is about the responsibility within systems and innovating at a higher level, which actually means that most of the cases companies innovate on the level of a technology, a product, perhaps a service, but all of these technologies, products, and services are embedded into larger systems. For example, if you invent a new engine for a car, which car is part of a transport system, then the engine itself is something you can design, but you could design the whole mobility system on a much higher level. In many cases, we do not design these systems really on purpose. Well, with public transport, in many cases we do. When you think about healthcare, financial system, food systems, many of these systems simply emerged, were never designed like that. But if you design them, if not you, if we together could co-design them, that would open up many new opportunities regarding resilience, regarding sustainability, and also for the individual company, it means that you can become a game changer. You can become the one who sets the rules. So what have we done in the Living Innovation project? Actually, we set up a virtual community platform where experts, right now we have nearly 2,000 registered experts. They can collaborate, they can exchange, and we ran a series of 20 responsible innovation labs together with citizens and experts all across Europe. The labs were on the very different topics. So in 2019, most of them were live. In 2020, because of COVID, most of them were virtual, covered very different aspects. What came out of these labs was then further processed via the community platform with virtual innovation corners. And we now were in the video studio producing 10 showcase videos and a series of blueprints where you can see what came out of it. So what happened on this virtual community platform? Actually, we called it joint actions. We said if more than 3, 4, 5 members do something together, that's joint. And if they do something, it's an action. So we set up a series of different actions where we facilitated the exchange and the co-creation of whatever. We collected smart health cases and done some championships on that. We dealt with affordable smart homes. We explored the business case and so on during the last 3 years. So one element of the Living Innovation project was this kind of virtual exchange platform. Part of this platform was also a series of virtual innovation corners and online dialogues. So there were some questions where we co-developed sustainable solutions, for example, on holography, on extended reality, on indoor farming, on social robots, and so on. And we ran online dialogues on cutting-edge topics all around the case of remote working. Actually, why? Because everybody was working from home. And this was also something where we thought, okay, leadership challenge on the one hand and technology on the other might make some sense to have a series of online events just to exchange experiences and views on remote working. Aside of this, we ran video interviews online and on site, a series of nearly 100 interview videos with experts from all around the globe. By now, we reached an audience of more than 20,000 views in total. So from Sandy Pentland, who's a professor at MIT, to Mark Ellsberg, who's a science fiction author, from the former Director General of DG Research and Innovation, Robert Jan Smits, to CEOs like Sabine Herrlichka from Infineon, Johann Schachner from Atos, or Harald Leitenmüller, who's Chief Technology Officer from Microsoft Austria. These were very interesting interviews because we touched a broad diversity of issues of responsible innovation from, for example, European view saying what is a pathway to a system-wide innovation in Europe, to very concrete cases of different companies, for example, also Sandra Kollet, who's CEO of Miele in Austria, and some also quite interesting, more scientific views, for example, Sandra Spiekermann on which kind of digital future do we want. So we had academics, former or recent high-level policymakers, and CEOs. What is the takeaway of this project? As I said, 100 video interviews, 20 webinars. We have responsible innovation showcases. There is a guidance document for workshops with blind people. There's a co-creation toolkit, how to co-create innovations. There will be some policy briefs, a book, and some presentations. So what is it now in a nutshell? What is the basic takeaway of what is responsible innovation in a business context? How can it be told to companies? First, consider the impacts of the future impacts of your innovation, because you reduce sunken costs, you avoid sunken costs. Second, innovate with the people and for the people, because it's more creative. And co-design whole system, because it gives you more opportunities to design. You do not have to adapt to anything, to everything. As a manager, you can co-design whole systems. Well, this was a quick tour de force through 3 years of living innovation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre. If you have any questions for Andre, please do type them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the session. So I think next we have Carlo Sessa, the Research Director at ISINNOVA, who will present about smart public transport. Please welcome Carlo. Carlo, you might want to unmute and also share your screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I will share. Okay. And to start the presentation, thanks to Andre for from the introduction. that actually was even faster than planned. So I will try to keep this this schedule. And okay, my presentation will take a perspective which is what has been introduced as the high-level perspective of the whole mobility system and how it will change with autonomous driving technology and the use of artificial intelligence to support our mobility. In so doing, actually, I introduce a perspective which is also a perspective not only of what we could do with the future technology, but also what we should do with the technology. So there is a kind of more philosophical thinking about the ethical implication of this technology that matters in this discussion. And I use as a basis for presenting this vision the work of an ethical philosopher, Luciano Floridi, that actually is the most advanced in terms of thinking about how we will live in the infosphere, how we should play with artificial intelligent agents that interact with us. And in particular, in the mobility system, the possibility of having autonomous driving vehicles for private transport and for public transport. So my presentation is at this level. As you will see, will be followed by a more practical presentation about the implication from the disability people. But of course, I'm fully open to have questions for grounding this into the public transport sector in particular. So, as you may see, until recently, we thought that digital technology were just going to decrease the need to move around. Today, we shop online, and the new selling agents are a recommender system which canvas the space of information or infosphere. It is true that we move a lot of bytes and not just atoms around, yet this is not the whole story. More people who cannot drive today will be able to do so in the future, thanks to increased level of automation. It is far more accurate to say that digital technology are changing the very essence of mobility. They are re-ontologizing it in 4 different ways. And this is the scheme that I want to present to you that actually come from the source that is mentioned there, that I suggest is a very short paper, but very, very, very effective. So basically, there are 2 dimensions that the digital revolution will help to transform of human mobility. The journey and the trip. The journey is basically the physical process of movement with several aspects that are easily quantifiable and are quantified actually in terms of medium employed cost, time, distance, speed, and so forth. The other component actually is the experience, the experiential trip during the journey. This for human beings, of course. This has qualitative aspects that are more subjective and is more difficult to specify, such as perceived duration, novelty, enjoyability, and so forth. These 2 dimensions are used for considering 4 different logical contexts where autonomous artificial intelligence, autonomous systems will change the way of moving. And these are very general. First of all, no travel. This is the example of what we are doing now. Simply, we are interacting in the infospheres, and we have avoided trips for being in contact. This is the activity that we do on the virtual community platform of Livin. And although it was really boosted by the COVID situation, we all think that in terms also of reducing mobility will be good if this kind of activities will continue in the future with the support of the technology. And but connected to this no travel, there is also activities that have then an impact in terms of physical mobility on the only journey dimension, which is when you shop online, but then or you go later to take what you have ordered, or someone, the logistic chains, will bring to you that material. And the fact that you have online possibilities will increase in that sense, that kind of mobility a lot, because with a click, only with a click, you will buy something that if you have to go to the shop to buy, you will not do. You know? So very, very clear. So this is the first more classical impact, no travel at all, but that already induce more travel of goods, for example. Only trip. This is the situation in which you don't change so much your journey decision, but you change the way in which you experience the journey thanks to the technologies. So it's absolutely, it's clear that the only trip is a dimension in which you have some assistance while you are in a vehicle, your private vehicle, so in driving, or public transport, so the comfort in public transport. A typical example is the satellite navigator, or the fact that you have the possibility from the connected road to know, to see on your screen of the when you drive that there is a speed limit in that part of the street. All these kind of things that make your experience better because you can be more relaxed, because you know that you have not to think too much too many things. You have just to enjoy driving. So this is the second context of evolution of this of this landscape. Then the only journey. These actually are the component purely automatic and managed journeys with no trip component. So are vehicles that do things for us, basically they help to make more efficient mobility at lower cost, lesser time, better routes, and especially just-in-time services, just-in-time rerouting on these kind of things, and 24-hour, 7-day services that if you have vehicles that are driven by human beings, you have problems, of course, of constraints, of resources, of employees, of cost for doing that. You can imagine, for example, areas where you cannot provide a public transport because the demand is too low, but you could have automatic shuttle services that help to keep the day and the night open the service to the users, for example. And this is a part where a lot of innovation is needed into the public, is expected into the public transport sector. Finally, there is the new travel form of mobility, where you have both, thanks to digital technology, the possibility of, for example, sharing a system of bike sharing that, or on the long distance, kind of for example, the BlaBlaCar services, where simply the fact that there is the platform that can create the interaction with the people that you want to involve into riding for a trip, create this new possibility. And in the urban systems, you have car sharing, but especially, for example, bike sharing systems that are actually allowed by the existence of digital platform. Otherwise, you could not manage them. And so these are also kind of new sustainable mobility forms that somehow also in ethical terms are more sustainable. So it's important to consider this variety of landscape because in theory, full autonomous vehicles requiring no driver at all are logically possible because there is nothing intrinsically contradictory in assuming that all potential difficulties will be resolved by the right kind of technology in the future. But it's not really this that matters for preparing to the future, and especially to the more immediate future in the next years. In practice, Instead, what we are likely to witness will be deep transformation of whole environments to ensure that the available technologies will be successful. Because it's not only a matter of making a reliable technology, but also creating the infrastructure that help the technology to work autonomously. We are enveloping, this is the term that Floridi used for stressing this point, the world around the capacities of our digital technology. For understanding this, think of the difference between developing totally reliable visual systems to enable an autonomous vehicle to identify and recognize a road signal in any weather condition, in any context, with snow, rain, all these kind of things, to the actual feasibility of re-engineering all the road signals in a given environment, say, for example, an airport, to make them communicate with the vehicle wireless and seamless. No? So digital technology that we start to have will work, because also the environment in which they work will change, and this environment will impact much more probably the single technology itself on the life of the people, because you change the environment in which you interact. The streets will be not only for the road driven by people, but also for road driven not unmanned vehicles, and so you need to respect how you move in your urban space, for example. So what really matters actually to prepare the future, this is the conclusion of my presentation, on which I hope to trigger your interest in terms of what could be practically the implication for the public transport sector. The question about the future of autonomous driving is not when or even where, but how it will take place. It will be a matter of what options, choices, and degree of autonomous driving are offered to customers. Their needs, preferences, attitudes, and circumstances differ. They are best addressed by a flexible variety of alternatives. Public policies and business strategies together about autonomous driving will need to make variety a feature, not a bug to be cancelled, and concentrate on re-engineering, enveloping whole environments to make autonomous vehicle an ordinary reality. As you see, this is in the conclusion of the paper of Luciano Floridi, so I took this quote that I think is very clear. But for our living work, actually, and the application of this work and this approach to public transport and to mobility in general, I think it's really to understand that there is this future landscape ahead of us. And this will require a variety of public and business responsible innovation actions and processes. Because for developing a public shuttle in a city, you have to imagine the connection of the companies that build these systems, the technology, but the city that have to introduce those, and the people and the citizens and the local organization that want to preserve their life environment to host these new vehicles. And usually they are not involved at all. In a responsible innovation process, they should be involved. And so I complete my presentation again with a should, not a could, because I think that all these aspects of ethical foresight, that is what I have presented now, is necessary for opening the discussion with all the users that will be impacted by these changes, with the help of those co-creation tools and elements that we have developed in our project. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Carlo. I'm sure that was a very interesting presentation. I'm sure there'll be some, hopefully there'll be some questions about the actual practical implementation of this in daily life, I suppose, or in the innovation cycle for public transport. Finally, I would like to present Klaus-Peter Wegger and Bianca Lauer, who will be talking about responsible innovation for smart mobility. I guess take it away, Klaus-Peter.
Hello and good afternoon to everybody.
Also a warm welcome for me.
This is my colleague Bianca. She will help me with the presentation. Responsible innovation for smart public transport seems to be a very interesting topic, but we are looking to those users of public transport who have or may have some problems with public transport. And we use the mechanism of responsible innovation to identify their special needs. The motivation of this approach is very easy. You may already know it, or you see the developments in your city. Many cities will become greener, smarter, and this is a development for the next years. In these cities, there will be fewer cars on the road, and of course, public transport will continue to grow, digitalized, optimized, and more flexible. And there is the question, will these benefits apply to all users? Using public transport can be difficult for some users, and we will deal with this aspect in the next minutes. While many physical barriers in public transport are going to be solved, this is, of course, a long journey, but people, cities, network providers, they know what to do. But new barriers may appear. These barriers are in the field of digitalization of public transport, but especially digitalization may have a big benefit for those who are not so mobile but reliable on public transport. Design for all, including all citizens, is essential for 10% of the population, necessary for 40%, and comfortable for 100% of the population. And will we disregard this number for 40% in public transport? Using public transport in public spaces, we need to distinguish a little bit what are the special user groups. There are persons with no vision or with limited vision, with limited or without color perception, without hearing or with few or limited hearing, without or with limited language abilities, with limited handling or strength, with limited reach, with, of course, some cognitive impairments, for example, older persons. And of course, people want to use their assistive technologies or will travel with their assistants.
When talking about visual impairments, one should have in mind that there's not only one visual impairment, but different eye diseases that have different effects. In order to make it clear how differently people with visual impairments see, we have provided a picture of how people with normal sight see, and that is the first picture, and the same picture with the simulation of various eye diseases. So as you can see, visual impairment manifests itself in very different ways. For example, through blurred vision, also through spots in the field of vision. And these are just a few examples, but these diseases can also occur in combination. So you should have that in mind.
We wanted to know more about these different user groups. Therefore, we performed workshops, co-creation workshops with people with reduced mobility to find out what are functional requirements for a mobile application. and what are the relevant information and the relevant services these groups want to have and want to use. We, of course, focused a little bit more in detail on blind and visually impaired persons, not leaving out the others. And we performed several series of workshops with these user groups, with persons of all ages, most times quite mobile persons. That means they can walk and work in the public environment. And we had up to 14 persons in one physical workshop. And of course, we had to change to remote workshops, web-based workshops over the time of the last year to the well-known aspects of Corona. Web participation in a workshop is very complex in the field of persons with disabilities, especially for visually impaired or blind persons. The switch to this format was a little bit difficult, and we, of course, from this, we had some experience published in some guidance documents available on the Living Innovation website. The interesting issue was finally a positive development, because the willingness to participate over the complete series of workshops becomes higher, because people had not to spend time for traveling. They had no difficulty for traveling, to organize barrier-free traveling. So it was very surprising. The topics seemed to be very interesting for the participants. So most of them participated all the series of exactly 12 workshops. Here are some ideas. What is the output of this workshop? It's not very, we'll say, surprising, but the tendency is that the needs of persons with reduced mobility are first quite same, but then they are different in special issues. Here is some output on buses, trams, and trains. Of course, people want to have some information about the station and the bus stop. That means this is static information. You only want to know where it is, but you want to know what are the what is the environment and what are elements in this bus station. For example, tactile indicators. We want to know more about the vehicles, and this should be something you want to know before the vehicle arrives. Upon the arrival, you need some dynamic information, real-time information. For example, delay, or where are free seats, and so on. During the ride, everybody wants to know some more information on what will happening in the near future, what is about the connecting trains, buses, and so on. But you need also some special information for persons who are not seeing the displays. Services. You all know the stop request on the bus. You have to search for the button, and if you have a digitalized application, you need not search for the stop buttons. You can activate some services, for example, the acoustic door detection signal, which blind persons want to have to identify. Request for lowering the vehicle. That's important for wheelchair or rollator users. And of course, you can request other services, like, for example, opening all the doors of the vehicle. Interesting things will happen when you think about autonomous driving shuttles. In this case, you don't have the fallback situation of a driver. You can have assistance. You have no driver as a fallback strategy. That means the requirements on autonomous driving vehicles are much higher because, for example, they are silent, they are electrical. Where is this vehicle which you just requested for? Is the door open? When does this vehicle approach? Where is the door? And so on. So the requirements are higher, and you have to think how to deal with emergency or bad situations when nobody is available to help you in a bad situation. But there are some more issues you want to know and to use in public spaces. These are, for example, guidance systems for low vision or blind persons. This is, for example, you know it probably from your city, traffic acoustic lights with a pilot tone to find the traffic light and to the released signal. You want to have this without finding the pole. You want to operate it on your mobile, for example. Of course, warnings at railway crossings are the second request, or simply acoustic beacons which mark points of interest, e.g. entrances or other things to locate. And some more issues are the lifts, where are they located and how can I operate them? You may have seen these poles in front of the lift where these are installed for wheelchair users to get access to the buttons. And this is no longer required as soon as you can operate the lift with the mobile application. And finally, and this is a very new development, it's the topic of e-scooters. This is not to request for an e-scooter to drive with. This is a warning for e-scooters. If your mobile phones warns you about an approaching silent e-scooter, or that's even more difficult, for a parking, not well parked e-scooter. This is a very concrete danger for persons with low vision or no vision at the moment. And this is why this group is struggling with e-scooters. Finally, we have to think about what are the requirements for the accessibility of the mobile application. Okay, this is not very new, but the essential requirement is this application has to be as simple as possible. It has to support the assistive technology built in most smartphones, and it has to be very reliable. And it's very important to not deal with the application, but to deal with your movement task, your task to walk through the environment, to reach and enter the bus, the train, and so on. The application is your services, your silent assistant, probably not disturbing your travel. And of course, we call it task-related design. That means filtering is a very positive, consistent of screen layout, and of course, to pre-bug some functions. E.g., I don't want to activate a door finding signal when the bus is approaching. I don't have time for that. This should be preset. And as soon as the bus of the right number, of the right line approaches, then the system does the function, activates the function automatically. A lot of theory. And we tried to make a sample application from that. This is a little bit starting beyond the living innovation. We want to know, is this all feasible? And this, the next slide shows you an example. I'm sorry, it's in German at the moment only. This is from our test field in Paderborn, where more than 100 buses are equipped with Bluetooth technology to bring the services to the user, traffic signs, and we have some impressions from that.
I hope you can see the video now. Just a moment. I have to press play. Yes, so there's no sound because it's in German, just to let you know. The video is about an app that has already been implemented in Paderborn. That's our city here where we work. So it's in Germany. Oh, I'm afraid there's more. No, now it works. Okay. And this app has already integrated some function that Klaus-Peter mentioned. So it's useful for people with reduced mobility and helps the people, for example, to find their way around public transport. You can see Klaus-Peter now searching for a bus. And the app has several functions. So we have on the one hand, the support of navigation, for example, finding bus stops and other points of interest. And on the other hand, the app also contains a monitor function and shows the timetable for the current stop. So Klaus-Peter found the bus he wants to enter, is now in the bus, and now he has some other functions. So he has he has services that he can request via the app. For example, the stop request, the lowering of the vehicle, or door detection signal. And the app also contains a radar function that can be used to display which buses are approaching, which stops are the next, for example. And we also have a monitor function integrated that shows the timetable for the current stop. So these are all functions that are integrated right now and are in use.
Yes, and with this, excuse me, with this feasibility study, we are going a next step now. We found the output of this workshops that positive and that important that we decided to create a standard on that. The standard with the English title, Smart Mobility for Persons with Reduced Mobility, Functional Approaches. This is at the moment a German standard under in the commenting phase. And we hope that it will be on one hand, a candidate on as a European standard. And of course, it should be a motivation for cooperation with public transport operators and manufacturers and cities, because they need to follow a common approach, not only in Germany, but also in Europe. And that's our vision. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Klaus-Peter and Bianca. And I think one of the things for me that comes out of your presentation is just how much these sorts of applications don't just benefit people with reduced mobility, but also people who might have, general levels of mobility, because often I don't know which stops coming. It's nice to have things that will tell me which buses are coming next and which stops are coming up as a tourist, for example, not just to someone who's perhaps commuting. So it's these sorts of attempts to go to ensure that everybody is taken into account and catered for actually can help a significant number of people, even outside that targeted group, which I think is really exciting. So thank you very much. I'd like to move into the Q&A stage now. Once again, I'd like to thank all of our speakers, and I'll just sort of go back to the beginning, because there was an interesting question about environmental and climate responsible innovation. And I think really, I suspect that the context for this is more within the public transport context, obviously, given the theme of today. So I'm interested in views from our speakers on what about the positive and negative climate or environmental responsible innovation approaches or mechanisms that can be used. Perhaps, Andre, you can elaborate a little bit on your response that you said there.
Well, I tried also already to respond by using the chat, actually, when it's about sustainability it's basically about impact, because unsustainability is often an externality problem. If you're an economist, you frame unsustainable development as an externality problem, which actually means benefits and profits here and now, and in money, and losses somewhere else in the future, in non-monetary terms, or somewhere else around the globe. So in many cases, unsustainable developments are boundary phenomena. If you look at a broader scale, if you look beyond the boundaries, you see the losses. You could also say privatizing profits and socializing losses. Happens quite often. So when you consider impacts on whatever, biodiversity loss or climate change, or you might name it, then you have to look beyond the boundaries. That increases complexity, and that is always a challenge for innovation managers, because actually innovation is very, very complex. And if you say increase complexity, most of the time the innovation managers say, God damn it, please don't do that. It's so difficult. We're competing and we have to be agile and we have to do all of that stuff. And what's even more difficult is that one innovation manager told me once, innovation happens at the edge of chaos. So, okay, you have to accept that this is chaotic. You have to deal with it. You sail on the edge of chaos by getting more inspiring ideas. So when you now look for boundaries, does it even get more chaotic? So designing these processes gets more and more complex for innovation managers. And we see this difficulty. For example, when we dealt with responsible design thinking is a well-known method in innovation management to say, okay, this really tries to make people more creative. This really steers creativity, agility. And then you say, but please take care of future impact. Creativity is gone. Everybody's afraid. So how to balance this? You have to balance it via the process, which means there are phases in this process where it's super creative and you don't care about impacts. And then you have certain kind of outcomes from this process, and then you have to sort them out. So to design processes, which is like one part is more creative, less thinking about impacts, and one is more sorting out and considering impacts. And then it's also the question, do you consider impacts as taking care of a side effect? So first you have your technology, then you think, yeah, but what about the impacts? We have a smartphone. What about the impacts on children at the age of, let's say, 1 year using the smartphone? How does it influence the brain development? First you have the smartphone, then you have the child, then you have the brain damage. Okay, you could do it the other way around as well. You could say, okay, we have a societal problem. We innovate with a purpose. So that turns things upside down. It makes innovation as the problem solver. First, you have to address the right problem. So either you have the solution already, you could also say technology push, and you take care about the side effects and consider future impacts, or you turn it around and say, Houston, we got a problem. This Earth is heating up. So now, come on, dear companies, you're the most powerful innovation machines that we have on this globe. Solve it. So it's about agenda setting as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, is that it is a much broader thing than just let's create technology to solve climate change. Carlo, do you find that in your readings and your work that is environmental sustainability, climate change, are these parts of the drivers for things like autonomous vehicles, for example? You'll need to unmute yourself, sorry.
Actually, I was thinking to the last question actually that I received about privacy, but well, about sustainability, it's clear that autonomous transport could help a lot to improve sustainable mobility, but again, it's a matter of choice, because by one side you have the risk of increasing the traveling by car when the car are much more comfortable, and so you will have an increase actually of kilometers, mobility, emission, all these kind of things. So some strategies that go in that direction can have a negative impact. By the other side, I think it's important, but this is also an issue of cultural improvement of public transport, because the public transport, I think, has a problem of in addressing this more broader vision of using public transport services for helping a more polycentric kind of territorial development, when you provide services that can be used, automated services that can be used also in less dense areas, for example. This is something particular because in less dense areas, simply you cannot afford to have public transport. But if you have autonomous, small sites, vehicles connecting, for example, a rail station with some point in villages, will help to realize a much more polycentric and sustainable mobility in a wider territory. Again, here is a strategy not only of public transport operators, but especially a strategy for the public government, for cities, regional, so it's for public policy.
Thank you. All right, Joy Dean has a question, and I think this is really aimed at Klaus-Peter. How did you cope with low levels of digital skill when running the online workshops? Or was the sample only restricted to those who are capable of operating the technology? How did you take this into account?
Okay, this question is a good question because we had a lot of trouble to find the right techniques to get remote access to the discussions. And indeed, the fallback strategy was the telephone access. And in the beginning of this remote web meetings, we had a lot of trouble to find out tool which is easy to operate, which is not overloaded with functions, which gives you exact access to the meeting directly from the given link without any lot of configurations and so on. And we spent a lot of time to teach some people how to use these tools. But on the other side, most of them were very happy about this this service because they can use it also for other remote conferences, remote calls, and so on, so on. So this was something like a special support for the COVID situation. To give you one other example, when running a meeting site like this, we typically publish a shortcut information, how to mute, unmute, or how to open the camera or to close the video function and so on. So many issues are easy to handle with shortcuts, which nobody knows. So we had to spend a lot of time. And if you are interested in more details, we had a webinar, especially on this. And maybe we can put it later in the chat. We have a publication in the Living Innovation project where it goes to much more details how to accommodate persons with reduced abilities and how to adapt RRI methods to their needs, because some issues didn't work. And we had to find out this, but this is documented in some more detail in our project platform. And you, of course, are welcome to contact me later.
Great.
A lot of details we can provide.
Thank you very much. And then finally, our last question is from Malcolm Fisk. He says, it occurs to me that such smart systems, in order to provide good services for people who may have mobility problems, can need to know more about the people concerned. In this context, should we be insisting on any special provisions to ensure data security in relation to the characteristics and travel patterns of service users? This is definitely aimed at Klaus-Peter, but I think Carlo was also interested. So we'll start with Klaus-Peter.
It's very difficult to answer because the requirements of people are very different, and the needs of traveling are very, very different. So I don't have a clear answer on that. there will be a lot of change in the public transport, and people also have to learn to deal with this. And I think a very critical point is the reliability of the services. If I get real-time information for a connection and it is not correct, I'm losing my route and I'm losing trust in the system. So there are some more problems which are critical for especially this group. Maybe, Carlo, you can add from your point of view.
Yes, I had from a point of view that is not that of the people with disabilities that are in some way are the extreme situation, but more general for all people. I think that this is a very relevant issue, and I think we should actually develop an answer that I agree with you, Klaus, that is still not clear. I had in mind that in our event on the smart home, there was a presentation and a discussion about privacy at home. That is clearly an important issue. I think there is a parallelism here on privacy in using data privacy when you use transport vehicles, public transport, but even private automated assisted private vehicles. I want to make two examples. First of all, on our smartphone, we are all traced for funny things. When you go to the restaurant, Google asks you how was the experience. So it's a strange issue here because for them there is almost no privacy. Of course, you can avoid this, but in practice it happens. So you can imagine to have a smartphone that, with your consent, I think, with your consent, follow you when you are using a particular modality of transport for reason of your safety. It's something similar to what ordinarily is done. For example, the owner of the vehicles, especially when you have an old vehicles, you give your data to the emergency car service, and you do that voluntarily. You can imagine in public transport, especially connected to the new issues connected to the pandemic, to the need of being safe when you get a public transport, some tracing of your trip experience, but always based on a kind of voluntary adhesion to that, I think. And that could be a service. If you think that in Italy now, for ensuring people that on the public buses, only people with masks and green pass can take public transport, they are thinking to return back to having a second person on the bus. That was the whole control of the tickets. I think that an app that helps you not only to access on the bus because you have the ticket, but also to be safe, you and that the bus is currently a safe environment, will have a lot of success on the for the public transport users and customers. So I think that this is something is really an aspect of responsible innovation, which I think is important to develop further.
Great, thanks very much. Andre, do you have any thoughts on that? Or no, you're good? Okay. All right, well then, oh, sorry, yes, Klaus-Peter.
I would like to give a very simple example. There's an app available which I can use as a blind person, and I'm using it for my personal, it's my personal decision. It makes a photo from, we'll say, a bottle, and it tells me, this is a bottle of beer. It tells me what is the type of the beer. It does not tell me if it makes headache or not. And somewhere in the world, there is a server, and this information, Klaus is drinking beer, maybe recognized, perhaps seen by anyone else. I don't know what happens with this data. For me, this is a tool, and I decided for myself, I don't care if somebody wants to know if I'm drinking beer which makes headache or not. So this is a question of undue burden.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you very much to our speakers, and we'll move on now to a bit of an interactive discussion. So I have a Miro board, which I am assured by Miro is accessible to screen readers, so I'm hoping that that's the case. The link is here, and what I would like participants to do is, this is an anonymous board. You shouldn't, I mean, if you want to put in your personal information, that's fine, but you should be able to connect anonymously. What I'd like to do is get some thoughts from you. You've heard our three speakers talking about responsible innovation, and particularly in areas where for public transport and the future of public transport. And I'm just wondering, what from discussions today, what has been most interesting to you in terms of your own work? And I'll share the screen in just a second, but yeah, what's most interesting to you about responsible innovation? Perhaps things you've heard today, or things that you might be curious about, you want to learn more about. We're interested in finding out what in your sector is of interest to you from the things that we've been talking about. So please take a note, put it down and type in it, and I will share the screen so we can then discuss it. All right. So I'll give you a few minutes just to put some ideas down. All right, so we've already got one about linking responsible innovation with business opportunities. And I think definitely the talk that Andre gave at the beginning was the fundamental part of that one. It's really been an interesting thing. So responsible innovation is a relatively new term. We've had corporate social responsibility for a really long time, for example, but the idea of responsible innovation has only been the last, 10-ish years or so. Not even that, perhaps. And the business cases for responsible innovation have only been fairly recently developed. And so it is still an emerging area. How do we see responsible innovation as something that can actually be not just a kind of a roadblock to businesses, but actually an opportunity to businesses, and potentially a money-making one. We've also got thinking of the purpose first and the technical capability after. That's obviously in response to Andre's comment at the last, in the answer to that first question about sustainability. And this is a fairly this is a really good classic question of responsible innovation. A lot of the times you see tech people develop technology to kind of either scratch an itch, or to they want to disrupt something. There's the classic pitch of, this is Uber for, pizza or something like that, whatever, right? And this kind of disruptive technologies can often be looking at solving technical puzzles, or things like Bitcoin's a really good example of that. Bitcoin's a very good technical puzzle that's been solved, but now has actually got significant negative effects because the purpose of it was not really, and the overall context of it wasn't really put into place until later. Getting to grips with what irresponsible innovation is yeah, so that is actually, so things like best practices, for example, and to make sure that your innovations are not irresponsible that's a really good aim, I guess. And I think certainly on our Living Innovation project, we've got now a series of toolkits that can potentially help you with that. And there are quite a few responsible innovation projects that have been European funded that can help with that. So the previous project project prior to Living Innovation was called Compass, and we looked at things like different responsible innovation metrics that you can measure potentially for your company. Techniques and tools that could be applied to inclusive design and including the needs and input of a wide range of people. So this is my particular area of specific interest, because I worked with low-income families and deprived areas of my city, and trying to get inputs on what the future of technology looks like for families. And that was, smart home technologies. And this is definitely something that in the Living Innovation website, I can link it in the chat. We have a new toolkit that's just been released that looks at inclusive innovation. And I'm sure someone can find that link for one of my many colleagues who are on this chat can probably find that link. And then thinking more about the balance between inclusive approaches and getting to market for products, etc. Yes, so this sort of idea of the minimum viable products and getting the technology, the prototypes out there, getting that out is really important, obviously, especially if you want to invest, attract investment. And often things like making sure you include lots of different perspectives and think of different types of user groups can be left a little, to the wayside. So there is a balance to be struck there. And maybe actually, Andre, I can see you in the on the video there. Do you want to say something about that? Because that's up your alley, I think.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm still with this linking RI with business opportunities, and
sure.
because I think that we could add something that we found in the Living project here. I think you have three types of companies that you have to deal with, or that you can deal with. The first one is the dark area, the dark valley, where you really cannot do a lot with responsible innovation, to my experience, because a company that based its business model on irresponsibility. So let's say low price manufacturer of textiles that are manufactured with very poor working conditions and very poor environmental standards. But it's super cheap. It's so cheap. It's so incredibly cheap. It's a t-shirt for less than €1, and it's based on fast fashion. And you could say it's for children and made by children. No, you would never call this like that. It gives the feeling of being cool and nice and with a unicorn and stars. However, that's irresponsible business model. Or let's say digging coal out of the ground and burning it. Yeah, if this is the basic business model of a company, you cannot really do it in a super responsible way. So it's very difficult to persuade a company then to go for responsible innovation if this would undermine its whole core competences, its whole core business. If the business is making money out of poor working condition of poor children in Bangladesh, yeah, you could now start doing it very different, but that's a different company, that's a different market strategy. So there it gets very, very difficult. Also difficult with sustainability issues and also with responsibility issues, because basically it's irresponsible. The only thing you could say is, dear government, dear policymakers, ban it. Difficult to talk with a company about that. On the other hand, you have this happy playground of the nice ones, of the so nice ones, the social entrepreneurs that have a marvelous startup and they do the super nice things, or the biofoods, and where everything is super nice. It's so incredibly nice that you really have to accept that this is not transferable to all the companies, because it's a very, very nice situation that's not, as every company, it's very specific. You can put them on the podium of every event. You can claim, you can clap at their presentations. You could praise them. You can celebrate them. But what about transferability? And in between, you have got a very normal company, standard company, not very bad, not very outstanding and good, but still innovative. And for these ones, I think it's really about a new story, showing them how this is an opportunity.
Yeah, I think this links into this blue comment here. They're creating awareness amongst public transport operators and PTA that inclusive solutions avoid a lot of complaints that are caused by non-inclusive solutions. They help also saving money by creating the right approach from scratch. I think that really, that's this sort of showing companies, showing innovators that these are not like, we're not we're actually creating opportunities for better solutions here, not just creating, because it's a classic thing, roadblocks, right? Oh, we have to go and do this. We have to abide by this standard. We have to go and talk to all these people. Now that's just going to increase the budget. It's going to increase the cost, all that sort of things, right? So it's about a longer term look, really, isn't it? Yeah. All right, thank you very much, everybody. I think that was really helpful to us to understand where you're coming from as well. And now I'd like to kind of scroll down, and you can do this in your own board as well, to where we're interested in what are you already doing in your practice that might be considered responsible innovation. We're not looking, we're just looking very broadly at the concept. We're not, it doesn't have to be a specific known method or anything like that. But what is it that, what are you doing that you think that we can learn from, or that you'd like to talk, tell us about that is a responsible innovation approach or method? I'll give you a few minutes. Oh, okay. Vasilis has suggested that they engage with stakeholders at transdisciplinary and cross-sectoral levels. Vasilis, would you be happy coming on and talking about that a little bit, about what you do with that and how you do it? If that's the case, if you'd like to unmute yourself and put your camera on, that'd be great. Or just unmute yourself is fine as well.
Yes, of course. Can you see me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. The whole idea is when we have totally new technologies that can have impact on people who even don't use, or then are not even targeted to use these technologies, however they may become impacted. It is very important to find ways to engage with the wide array of stakeholders, from the policy level down to the more practical, say, user citizen perspective. And already we're trying to do this as part of what you may have heard, the urban air mobility and the whole thing about drones. And in fact, I'm leading an initiative where the cities and regions are driving the process, or at least they try to influence. And we have had already some good impacts in terms of policy and regulatory aspects.
Okay, that's really cool. Thank you. Thanks very much for sharing.
Vasilis, how do you deal with the diversity of people that you have to involve? Nearly every person is a persona, and now you then have 200 personas, and whom do they stand for?
Yes.
So how to deal with this incredible diversity?
At the moment, we're not dealing at user level, as you would do in a typical, say, design thinking process. We're more on the policy level and representation of groups. So I think what you're mentioning is more about when you have to go down to the actual design of an artifact. Where we're still here, we are, I think, on a higher level problematic, which is about governance and how to set the policies that, at least at a higher level, we can set requirements about inclusiveness, for example. And it is the nature of the topic that it will take some years to go down to the pyramid to be able to think of the very different personas for using drones.
And when you talk about working with policymakers, do you then end up with any kind of policy document as a strategy or a roadmap?
More than that. We're dealing, for example, drones are coming from the aviation perspective, but also it's about urban mobility. So we have to try to bridge the urban mobility actors with the aviation actors. And this is what we have been trying to do through different perspectives. I happen to participate with different hats, either from my industry perspective, as part of an industry association, also as part of representing cities through the initiative Cities Community, So we try to create these dialogues, in fact, between the different stakeholders, and the output, what has been done. Last year, the initiative, the community of the cities, published a manifesto that then had an influence on the actual regulation that being approved by the European Commission, and that is part of the governance of the urban sky. So I think what is important here is about also some purposeful action with the target, not just say you do things or appear to complain, but try to find really solutions to problems. And I think if there is some goodwill to find a solution just to criticize for criticizing, you can always be constructive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's really interesting. Yeah, drones, of course. Yeah. Okay. We've also got here somebody who's written inclusive design methods that we've been working on for gaining a population perspective and understanding where a particular sample fits within the wider population. This is helpful for understanding who you haven't managed to include and how to address them. I'm not sure if whoever wrote that, are you happy to come on and talk about that at all? We'd love to hear about it.
That was me, Joy.
Oh, hi, Joy. Thank you.
So, video's not working.
That's fine.
Yeah, so we've been struggling a bit trying to understand, because when you do user trials or focus groups or whatever, you often only get a small sample, and struggling to understand, are they really representative of the wider population? Because you get this self-selection bias that people who like to be involved and engaged come along, and people who are a bit disengaged from society or technology or whatever don't. So we've been trying to develop techniques looking at gathering wider survey data. There's still a bit of a bias, but it's not nearly as strong as the bias that you get with user trials. Trying to understand, okay, so in the population as a whole, what's the spread of digital use? What's the spread of visual impairment? How do these match up? And then when you have your particular sample from the user trials or the focus groups or your online study, matching that up and saying, okay, we've got really great representation from visually impaired people who use smartphones a lot, but we don't have any from those visually impaired people who don't use smartphones. And looking at the survey, that is whatever percentage of the population. And you can then think, okay, well, that's such a small amount of the population that we won't worry too much. Or you can think, oh, actually, that's half of the visually impaired people. We better go and try and at least consider them in some other way. So that's partly what we've been trying to do. And some of the questions I was asking earlier about how do you understand the digitally disengaged perspective, particularly in COVID times when you have to use computers, is partly what we've been struggling with, or what we've been trying to grapple with in developing these techniques.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, this is definitely my area of passion as well. So I get why you're concerned about that. It's just so frustrating to see that, that the usual suspects come along every time. It's lovely to have them. Don't get me wrong, right? But it's the people who are disengaged from these activities that are often the ones who are the most vulnerable to significant changes that are made, right? So it's really important to actually be able to get to engage with them. Yeah, and I'm glad that you're working on it, but please let me know when you've found a solution, because I'd be really interested to hear about it.
Yeah, I'll put something on the chat about how you can.
That'd be lovely. Yeah, really, really good. Thank you.
What I would like to know is, you said you're working on these kind of sampling strategies, but that means that you sample the participants based on multiple criteria. So let's say, okay, we need some people with this education level, with this kind of habits, gender issues, area where they work. This ends up with a lot of demographic data that you need to know whom you represent and in what way. Do you lack this demographic data as a reference base?
So in our current studies, we've been able to run population representative surveys looking at the variables that we're interested in, which are to do with inclusive transport. So these data sets may be of interest to other people. This is the Dignity project, if anybody's interested. So we have some population representative data sets. of course, they don't go into the particular details of what people would want to know for a particular app or service, but they give you an idea of the population in general and help you to see who you haven't included. So that's part of the purpose. But yeah, you do need some quite large scale source of data.
Thank you.
Yeah.
An idea of the surveys, the population representative ones are about 1,000 people.
Yeah, fascinating. I'll definitely look that project up. Thank you. Finally, we have someone that has written that responsibility has multiple dimensions.
Sorry, sorry, Catherine, I had the microphone muted.
Oh.
Just to say that actually ISINNOVA is involved, is the coordinator of the Dignity project. So I'm not involved personally, so my colleague Silvia Gaggi is involved. But just to say, we will create an internal connection about
yes, ISINNOVA leads the Dignity project.
Lovely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this one here is that responsibility has multiple dimensions. The EU is reasonably on the ball with these, extending to responsible investment and non-financial reporting. But is it enough? I think that's a bit of a question for the ages, really. Is anything ever enough? But I don't know if this person wants to expand a little bit on that. Are you Oh, it's Malcolm. Of course, it's Malcolm.
Yeah, it's me. Yeah, just to actually rather following on from the other conversation, because there is a link here. You know, with regard to artificial intelligence and things like this, then there's some big issues about the representativeness of the populations that may be used, on the basis of which you know, algorithms are developed and so forth, and all kinds of biases that can creep in. The same is true with regard, of course, to consultation, and Andre made this point rather well, really, just saying about, in some cases, you'd need very, very large population sizes in order to get relevant data. So I suppose the essential point that I want to make really around this is that there needs to be a very high level of awareness, a much higher level of awareness than there is now amongst many people who are the innovators, who are the technologists, about just thinking more broadly about, well, who's going to be impacted by this thing that we're developing, who do we need to consult with, and not necessarily the usual suspects, as you point to. But actually real people. It's like, you know, obviously, you know, I do a lot of stuff with older people, and very often people who are developing products for older people will think about consulting with geriatricians and people like that, who see sick older people and therefore get a very unrepresentative population, when actually older people themselves are the experts. This would also be true of people with different disabilities. They are the experts. But it's recognition of that fact is a good starting point for any innovator. That actually, well, look, we don't know too much about this, but actually the people who know about it are the people who actually are faced with the challenges that certain types of disability may present them with, or live in particular circumstances that may be relevant, rather than thinking in accordance with old norms, prejudices, biases, and things like that, that they may have grown up with, or that they may think can be put to one side because they need to rush to get to market with this bright new shiny product. Without actually considering more broadly what the implications are. So yeah, the essential point is it's about broader mindsets, thinking about wide range of dimensions of responsibility, and just taking that little bit longer. I know that, you know, companies want to get to market, they want to sell their goods, they want to make profits, but just pausing a little bit more in order to take on that more broad perspective. Sorry, that sounds like a lecture. It wasn't meant to be.
No, thank you, Malcolm. And with that, I think we've come to the end of our session. And I'd really like to thank all of the participants, all of the speakers, everyone who's contributed to our board and to the discussion this afternoon. There's been some links put in the chat, so you're welcome to follow those and catch up with those. And yeah, obviously we have our website that's at living-innovation.net. Right? Yes, I just had a sudden panic. I thought it was the EU. Anyway, yes, Living Innovation. We'd love to see you, you know, collaborate with you in future as well, potentially. Yeah, Andre, any last words?
Just thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being interested in responsible innovation, and let's keep in touch.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. We'll see you all later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.